Hello and most welcome to Heidegger 1706. And we will now continue with Revelation and Revolution. Friedrich Engels and the Apocalypse by Roland Boer or Boer. And we still, yeah, that's a nice quote. Let's take that one. Let's go back there. I did notice it last time. And all this has now lost its interest except for ignorant persons who may still try to calculate the day of the last judgment. And I think what is indicated here by the quote by my colleague is that is still going on. And it's very interesting. We are presently at the third paragraph on page 15, actually, before it begins with. And once more, not to forget the camera. Well, oh, lovely. Lovely, lovely. Before we dismiss Engels's extensive exercise in comparison, I should point out that such comparisons abound today. It seems that every second book dealing with the New Testament has empire somewhere in the title. These works do not seek merely to situate the New Testament within the Roman Empire. A somewhat obvious point that is a response to the earlier emphasis on its deeply Jewish nature. But also argue that these texts are anti-imperial documents, or at least that one can find a consistent anti-imperial theme running through them. Invariably, the comparison is made with our own times, whether focusing on the imperialism of the United States, the global ravages of transnational corporations, or the profound difference between the majority of impoverished peoples of the world and a small number of the obscenely rich. While all this is salutary, I can't help wondering whether it loses touch with the political tensions in the Bible. Tensions between power and insurrection, reaction and revolution. Most of these studies call for some fundamental economic change, but few, if any, espouse a revolutionary agenda. However, we do find in much of this New Testament scholarship an item that Engels studiously avoids a revolutionary Jesus. This idea simply will not go away. The opposition that we find in the Gospels to wealth, power, and vested clerical privilege returns again and again to inspire one guerrilla after another. Not a few liberation theologians have heard the call to arms and joined a guerrilla group. Ernst Bloch was also keen on the idea, but I must admit to being a little skeptical for the simple reason that it is well nigh impossible to come up with any viable historical Jesus, no matter how many people have tried. Conclusion. I have followed a trail all the way from Engels's playful, and thereby protesting engagements with revelation in his teenage years to the final and full assessment of Christianity's revolutionary origins in one of the last essays he wrote. By way of conclusion, I'd like to raise two conundrums that emerge from Engels's enthusiastic embracing of a revolutionary Christianity. The first conundrum is that Engels takes a significant step following on from his essay on the Peasant War toward identifying a tradition of revolution in which the communists stand as the most recent exemplars. This is a tricky move, since Engels is all too aware that those earlier revolutions were inspired by the insurrectionary texts of the Bible. The advantage clearly lay in showing that the communists were not the new kids on the block, touting some newfangled story and practice that undermine the good old tradition. No, suggests Engels, for we have breathed life into the age-old aspirations of the downtrodden. The disadvantage is that such a move would undermine the determined efforts Marx and Engels had made to separate themselves from the theological trappings of earlier expressions of communism. Which, as they put into the manifesto, were nothing but the holy water with which the priest consecrates the heart burnings of the aristocrat. The second conundrum is whether Christianity provides a motive force for revolutionary movements. In other words, can an ideological system become a cause for political action? Here, Engels equivocates. On the one hand, he argues that Christianity was a cloak for political and economic agitation, providing in a theological lingua franca the common aspirations of people before science and materialist socialism. The impetus for revolution came not from Christianity itself, but from oppressive social conditions. With socialism, the time has come to shed that cloak and speak of the real causes. The difference between Christianity and socialism is that the former offers a heavenly answer to intolerable conditions. For one could look to salvation in an afterlife as an antidote to present suffering. Socialism offers a solution in this world, on this side. On the other hand, Engels also toys with the possibility that a system of ideas, beliefs, and even myths can influence the way in which people act. As George Sorel argued, such a system is told in narratives to motivate people, to give them hope that things will improve, and to incite them to persevere in the face of innumerable setbacks. This theme also runs through Engels' study of early Christianity. It seems to me that it is a more dialectical approach to the interaction of theory and praxis, for the beliefs that people develop and the narratives they tell are as much a response to pressing social and economic problems as they are reasons for changing things. Does not the revolutionary theory of historical materialism also play such a role, or at least in part? Of course, such beliefs, narratives, and myths never appear in a vacuum. They are connected in complex ways with social and political movements. We can have a little look at some outtakes here. Page 15, if down a bit there. It's the first hint. Invariably, one can find a consistent anti-imperial theme running through them. No, I missed. Or at least that one can find a consistent anti-imperial theme running through them. Invariable. The comparison is made with our own times of transnational corporations, or the profound difference between the majority of impoverished people of the world and a small number of obscenely rich. And further down, there is a mentioning that there is tension, I would call polarities, between power and insurrection, reaction and revolution. Most of these studies call for some fundamental economic change, but few, if any, espouse a revolutionary agenda. And then we go to page 16. 10 lines down. Engels makes a connection between the peasant wars, or war, never wars, and the inspiration coming from the Bible. And on the 10th line we have, this is a tricky move, since Engels is all too aware that those earlier revolutions were inspired by the insurrectionary texts of the Bible. Very important. There is an inspiration in the Bible for insurrection. And there is a pointed in the next sentence to an advantage. And that was to show that the communists were not the new kids of the block, toting some newfangled theory, and so on and so on. And then we go down to third paragraph, third line. On the one hand, he argues that Christianity was a cloak for political and economic agitation, providing in a theological lingua franca the common aspirations of people before science and materialist socialism. The impetus for revolution came not from Christianity itself, but from oppressive social conditions. And listen now, with socialism, the time has come to shed that cloak and speak of the real causes. The difference between Christianity and socialism is that the former offers a heavenly answer to intolerable conditions. For one could look to salvation in an afterlife as an antidote to present suffering. Socialism differs, for it offers a solution in this world. And now I think there's revealed here a very interesting connection to materialism and socialism. If you've been wondering why they are connected, this is the reason. And from the Marxist perspective, it is focusing on the real. Christianity is not offering anything in this world. It's a transcendental aberration, Tegmarkian world somewhere else. Whereas socialism is interested in this world, a real heaven, so to speak. And here we have it. This is a connection between materialism, reductionism, and Marxism. Comes natural. And the more you go into that path, the more obvious it becomes that Christianity is a sort of cloak that trick people into accepting social disnorms, social inequalities, and further on. And this of course also have a Derridian touch. Once you are into this thinking of Marxism, there's really no way out. And the conclusions are an incredibly interesting reversal of Christianity to some extent, but also a mirroring. There is a heaven promised. We do not know the criticism of this Engelian and Marxist idea is the promised heaven never came in any case, in any, not a singular case did it lead to anything of a semblance of a material terrestrial heaven. But that is not a counter-argument that would still hold, well, the understanding is correct. Isn't that interesting? So we see once you are in a certain lane, and I would say how knowledge has developed, the conclusions or reality becomes unavoidable. Until that day, someone says, well, how about the background? There is a background to everything. I will not mention that, but I think it's pointing to some other thing that we went through here earlier, but that would make the matter too complicated. I think this is incredibly interesting. The author is very eloquent, is well put, and I have a Marxist friend, and I said, what did I say? If you want to hear good, clear Spanish, listen to the very beautiful speech, no matter what you think. I'm not a defender of that. The last speech of Francisco Franco. And he with such pride say, I will enter into heaven, taking goodbye now. And my Marxist friend said, he obviously would do that because he was a Christian. It's a sort of trickery hidden there. And he didn't pose an argument, he just made a conclusion from the circumstances. But there is a background to both of these things, but not about that today. Kalle, join the scene.
Yes, so Boer notes that Engels avoids speaking of the revolutionary Jesus. And here we have the, do you hear me clearly?
Yes, I hear you, Clark.
So we have the implied dichotomy between people and Jesus, people and the leader. So the leader is downplayed. Instead, people is the hero of Engels. But I think also Boer's hero is the people, because he says like this on page 15. He doesn't care. Boer doesn't care about the historical Jesus. And let me go to next page, the last page 16. And there, here, Marx and Engels try to separate themselves from the theological trappings of earlier expressions of communism, because these were about the holy water with which the priest consecrates the heart-burnings of the aristocrat. So here we scholars always prefer the origin. Origin is the important. The original is important.
yes,
But here
yes.
is the other way around. The origin is something dirty. The early communism is something bad. The only communist that matters is that of Marx and Engels.
I have no idea, but I get the feeling that they are sort of going in that direction more and more, Marx and Engels, in the development. And there is some early on interest from Engels' part, I think, of Christianity. But once, so to speak, the evidence gathers and the whole, all the discourse, the context becomes clearer, they feel it necessary to separate themselves or being disjunct from Christianity. It's incredibly interesting.
Let me go last thing here about the lingua franca. Theology is something extra for Engels because but you here get to the you could ask Engels if theology is like a decoration in like the frame that you can dispose. Like the Derrida supplement.
Oh yeah.
But I think you cannot. I don't think that even they could get rid of this speech about theology. It's always there under the surface. That I think that Derrida shows in his book Spectres of Marx. There is always this speech about the apocalypse, a theological language. In order to have illumination or what you call it, enlightenment, you need also light, and light is always a theological argument.
Yes, it's very good. And I think two other things. I think how Bernard and Kangelham and François Jacob, they used, let's see here, what all we found. We found teleology, metaphysics, even life as such is used in order to prove that there is no theos.
Yes, they argued that, Bernard, they argued that the only thing that matters is not life really, but the reproduction.
Yes, but they still using, like in this example, the lingua franca of meaning and purpose and metaphysics. It's similar to in physics that you have a canvas with X, Y, Z, and you try to ignore the canvas and say only the relations on the canvas are important. The canvas in itself is nothing, which is of course the supplement that you cannot get rid of, as proven of quantum physics. This is similar. It's excellent, Kalle. Fantastic observation. They are using the theological language that was already established, Christianity, in the very majority, at least, of the communist countries. I can think of only two countries that were not Christian before communism took over, and that's China and Korea. And Vietnam free. Well, Korea is not a good example. Vietnam and China. And the rest of all the countries, Christian. So they used what was already established, the lingua franca, and at the same time denied it. Oh, fantastic. That was just excellent. I think we should end there while we are top, if you don't have some.
No, let's end there. Thank you.
It was beautiful. Thank you, Kalle Lundahl. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. Have a beautiful morning, day, evening, night, wherever you are. Bye-bye.